Between Lubomila Jordanova and Benjamin Bathke. They're going to talk about emergence of climate change startups and what happens when energy and climate tech is developed, how services and apps are built to serve the climate change. So guys, come on the stage. Welcome with round of applause.
Welcome everyone to this fireside chat. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes? Sounds good. Okay, good to see so many of you here. Now, if you expected Franklin D. Roosevelt to be on stage, I must disappoint you, and I also won't be talking about World War II. But as some of you undoubtedly know, this term fireside chat is actually derived from, or comes from, this series of the US president's informal national radio addresses from the 1930s and the 1940s. And obviously, the concept has evolved over time, and it's now more used for these really personal, immersive kind of conversations like this one. Now, enough with the history lesson and the spirit of Rotten Tomatoes founder Patrick Lee. Let's focus. We don't have an actual fire on stage, as you can see, but we do have the founder of a hot Berlin clean tech startup here. And what's even hotter than this startup is our planet. And that's precisely, global warming is precisely what Plan A, your startup, is trying to tackle. Now, I'm Benjamin Bathke, I'm a freelance journalist, and with me is Lubomila Jordanova, and she's the founder and CEO of Plan A. Welcome, I'm glad we're here. All right. So just a few words about Plan A before we jump in to this series of questions and answers. Plan A's B2C SaaS solution offers monthly carbon monitoring, monthly sustainable action plans, and carbon offsetting schemes. So in the next 30 minutes, we'll talk about that and a whole lot more, right? Cool. All right, so the first question I actually want to start is about the title, the name of your startup, Plan A, right? So it already suggests that you are focusing on this. There's no Plan B. So I want to ask you, because some people like Elon Musk are trying to make humanity a multi-planetary species, and I quote, in order to safeguard the existence of humanity in the event that something catastrophic were to happen. And we, as a matter of fact, we are already experiencing something catastrophic, namely environmental collapse, where some people would say we're on the brink of it. And so it's an existential threat. So just to play devil's advocate here, one could argue that it's already too late. Maybe that's not exactly what Elon Musk had in mind. But still, why would you focus on our planet instead of using all our time and resources for making sure that we can continue the possibility of existence elsewhere?
I think we have plenty of incredible resources, and also there's a lot to cherish, not only humanity, but also the flora and fauna and diversity we've had on this planet. So making sure it at least keeps some shape and form similar to what it is today, I think is really important. I think it's quite exciting to think that we can go on Mars, but maybe first we can take care of this planet.
Okay, and that's exactly what you're trying to do.
Yeah, exactly. For us, the focus has been since the beginning to make sure people reconnect with the importance of nature, people reconnect with actually the reason why we're on this planet, which is essentially being aligned with all the forces, which we certainly are not at the moment.
All right. So you talked about nature. So some of you might remember her presentation yesterday, where she talked about that surfing trip that kind of, if you will, was sort of the genesis of Plan A. So can you take us back to that vacation when you were surfing and you saw all this litter on the beach? And I'm asking specifically because this is not a unique experience, right? I think we've all been to beaches around the world and seen litter, but I mean, aside from maybe picking up a few bottles I would say 99% of us didn't do anything about it, at least not systemically. So as a journalist, I'm always fascinated by people who didn't just think about a problem or talk about it, but actually did something about it. So what prompted you to actually take action?
I'm one of those weird people that always carries a bin bag when I go hiking. So I think it was just something that was a natural reflex based on other experiences. But the site in Morocco, when I went there, was particularly shocking. One thing that was a first-time sight for me was seeing burned plastic. This is a way of recycling, popular across Middle East, Africa, and it's obviously used as just as an opportunity to remove waste that you see in front of you. But unfortunately, this increases by 3 times the CO2 emissions that have been, in any case, emitted by the fact that this plastic bottle was produced. So this was kind of the first item I saw, then everything else was just like other traces of human existence, and yeah, it was way too much to be able for anyone to ignore.
Right, and then, but how did you amid this giant problem, then how did you decide what to focus on and that you can actually do something about it? Because it looks, yeah, insurmountable at first glance when you see this. Huh?
I took my time. I was totally unaware about pollution, and I was totally unaware about the scale of the human-created climate change. At that point, I don't come from this background, and I had to educate myself about a lot of issues. The good thing is that we have internet, so we all can be quite quickly aligned with what is out there, all the knowledge that exists. And for 6 months, I was spending all my free time just teaching myself about climate change, and it was just a consistent confirmation that there's a problem.
Okay, right. So you had an inquisitive mind and you had a lot of questions, but it was not like you dropped everything and spent all your time doing that, right? You just collected some information, you educated yourself, and then after 6 months, what happened? What made you actually quit your job or whatever you did and then focus on this full time?
I kind of was thinking of quitting my job the moment when I started working on the topic, because I was finding a lot more purpose in educating myself about this than continuing with pure finance, which is what I was doing at that particular time. But what kind of got me thinking that I should be focusing full-time on this was one particular thing that I did. I built the first really simplistic version of our algorithm. Essentially, this was complicated Excel spreadsheet, I would say, that on one side was looking at the biggest environmental issues as explained by the UN, and on the other side, it was the funding that was available. And this is data that is public, anyone can access it, by the World Bank. And I was trying to find a positive correlation. Were the biggest problems actually being solved by the most investment being poured into them? And there was no positive correlation whatsoever, and this triggered me to kind of quit my job and decide to build Plan A.
Right, okay. Well, we'll come back to financing in a little bit. And wow, that's a big move. And yeah, you have not regretted it so far. It looks like it. Yeah.
No.
And you've come a long way. So fast forward to today. How old is Plan A? When did you launch it?
So it's 2.5 years. 2 years and 8 months.
Right, okay. And yeah, so that you've certainly come a long way. And how many employees do you have currently?
12.
12 employees,
Yeah.
okay. And a few customers? How
300.
many? 300 customers,
Yeah.
okay, right. So maybe we can, just talk about the current state of affairs briefly, and maybe talk about 1 or 2 customers and just kind of explain how your service, the action plan actually function and how they help your clients. Briefly, yeah.
So how the software works is that companies essentially sign up, they input their data, or the data gets to be pulled automatically. The system creates a dashboard for them that shows how much emissions they have emitted, and which is kind of an analysis of the status quo, and then automatically, based on their worst performing indicators, a sustainability action plan is built for this particular month. Each month, the action plan changes as the data of the company changes. And essentially, the point of each of the activities is to reduce emissions. So, yeah.
Okay. And maybe we can talk about one particular customer. I heard it through the grapevine that you have a famous German football club
Yes.
signed up. I know you can't say the name, but can you briefly talk about what exactly, how you're helping them?
Sustainability and football are actually old friends, which was something I learned fairly late.
Soccer, that is, right? Soccer, just to make sure.
Football.
Yeah.
Well, we're not in the US. And I kind of learned it because we got approached by this football club to explain to them what we do. They were quite happy and they wanted to understand what was going on their own kind of turf. And they found out that they have a lot of opportunities that they didn't even know they hadn't kind of considered them. And it has been amazing because they actually are so much, they're so sustainable and they didn't even know that they were so sustainable. We're helping them understand how they can become even more so and how they can improve their facilities so that it gets to net zero emissions, which will be the first, not carbon neutral, but kind of zero waste stadium in Europe.
Okay, wow, okay. So that demand is coming from the companies themselves, but I'm sure it's also driven by the consumers or their fans, I'm sure, to a degree, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
But it's also coming from the tech sector, right? Which is actually the topic 2 of our fireside chat. So you can also talk about, about all the 3 factors, so consumers, corporates, but also the tech sector. Maybe just describe that trend towards sustainability and how the tech sector is driving that.
So we have been doing this for 3 years, and it's been amazing to observe what's happening on the market. At the moment, you have so many pressures coming to big companies and also to governments. One is consumers, as you mentioned, and this is being expressed in the demand for sustainable products, the demand for transparency. So essentially, companies have to now report on how they are producing, what kind of products do they use, who is benefiting from their product in terms of stakeholders. When it comes to another, I think and for us it definitely has been incredibly beneficial as a trend, is the fact that also employees are putting a lot of pressure on their companies, because I think if you spend more time with your colleagues and in your company than what you spend with your family, you kind of, want to make sure that this is a sustainable environment from all the meanings of sustainability that the word has. And I think another pressure is just the fact that people are now a lot more educated. So this kind of leads to an environment where you feel the need to report. And Germany is an incredible example of what is going on. The Netherlands is doing amazing in terms of that. France as well. And everyone else is kind of also waking up.
Right. So on the one hand, you have this more education about the topic and the demand from consumers. And on the other hand, we still drive SUVs in record numbers. A number of air passengers actually has been going up. It's not been declining. Yeah. So there's this dichotomy, right? And actually, I recently read about a fitting term for this, and that many people are climate concerned, climate offenders. So especially those privileged ones who can afford to fly, etc., or drive a big SUV, they might do some things. They might not just forego meat. They might not become vegetarian. But then when it comes to the big points, flying, having a big apartment that's not very carbon friendly, or driving a big car, they might not make that sacrifice. So how do you reconcile that, I guess, right? Because of this dichotomy, you see, on the one hand, something that people say, that they want to protect the climate, and they also have expectations of governments and corporates, but on the other hand, we're not seeing them walk the talk, really.
I'm not a huge fan of these generalistic explanations, because I think society changes in waves, and it's never that the full society kind of wakes up to certain topics altogether. Okay. What you can see at the moment in Europe, and it's been validated by the European elections, it's been validated by changes in consumer choices in terms of what kind of products are actually getting more margins, is that there is part of the proportion of society that is changing their ways of being and behaving in a more sustainable way. For the rest, it's a process, and I think we need to be focused on educating people and using any opportunity that we have, because anyone that is in this room is certainly more informed than the majority, to use this knowledge and kind of spread it across, because the biggest problem why people are not sustainable, the biggest reason for that is that the fact that people don't know what sustainability means. So, yeah.
All right, and that's where data comes in, but also education, as you said. So actually, that's my next question, and sticking with challenges. I think yesterday you said that some companies that call themselves green tech or climate tech companies, that they're building carbon calculators without understanding the data behind it. And this might be an example of greenwashing, I don't know. So can you just, in general, talk briefly about the difficulty of obtaining and analyzing the right data to make sure that whatever information you provide is actionable and that it's actually accurate? Because so many times I'm found it as a consumer, if I take a trip from here, from Berlin to Helsinki, which I did in November by train, bus, and ferry, was extremely hard to figure out exactly the carbon footprint of each leg of my journey. So because sometimes, I mean, the energy mix is different in Germany and compared to Poland, etc. So yeah, maybe you can talk about that. And
in planning, we understand quite well what the importance of data is and actually how difficult it is to obtain it. We have been building our algorithm for close to 2 years now. And the first year was fully dedicated only on collecting, cleaning, and analyzing the data. What this means is that, first of all, we need to establish relationships with institutes. A lot of the people on my team are climate data scientists, and they've been in some of the top institutes of Europe. And this helps, of course, because then you have access to this data, you have access to this knowledge. But there's a lot of problems with climate data that go beyond relationships. One aspect is, for example, that there's a big number of countries which have skipped certain years in terms of reporting. So you find data until 2007, and then 10 years nothing, and then 2 years back.
Any
you have
examples of
new.
a country where it's hard to get that data?
So, for example, Syria has stopped reporting since 2011.
Right.
Afghanistan has quite a lot of gaps. And this is a common issue. And sometimes even for places like in some countries in Europe. And it's just because they decided, the Statistical Institute decided that this 1 year they're not going to report. So, yeah. How we look at the issue of carbon calculations is that we go country by country to find the data, because you can't, if you want to build a calculator that actually functions in every single geography, you need to be able to obtain data that is particular to this country. Average consumption of electricity in France is different than in Germany, is different than in Italy, and all of these data points exist, but then are not unified always. So yeah, you need to make sure you have access to the right one, and yeah, we've been benefiting from knowing the right people, I would say.
Right, thanks for elaborating on that. Okay, we're about halfway through. I want to mix things up a little bit and do a quick lightning round. Quick, pointed questions and equally short answers. You ready? Yes? All right, here we go. If you had to choose, Beatles or Stones?
Stones.
What's the biggest misconception about climate change?
That it's about emissions.
Okay. What was your carbon footprint in 2019? Your personal one?
5 tons.
Okay, that's about 5 times as much as
a person in Africa.
Yeah, right, yeah, okay.
But it's less than the average of a person in Europe.
It's less than the average person, but if okay, it's a lightning round, I have to keep going. I need to control myself. What's your worst climate sins, if you have any?
Flying.
Which term do you prefer, climate change or climate crisis?
Climate change.
Why?
Because I don't like the word crisis. It paralyzes people and it doesn't help them understand how they can act.
Okay, this is a personal one. Are you making any big sacrifices for the environment, such as deciding not to have kids?
No, I don't believe in that.
Okay.
If you teach your kids to be sustainable, they actually are going to be beneficial for society.
Okay. Who has the biggest responsibility? Consumers, corporates, or governments?
Corporates.
Why?
Because they move fast and they actually influence a lot of people's lives with the products that they give and the employees that they employ.
Okay. Who famously said the following sentence? Humans are the most irresponsible inhabitants of our planet, yet we're still the only ones who can save it.
I said it yesterday.
That's right. Good one. It was going to be a trick question, but I didn't get you. Nice. What's the most hair-raising example of greenwashing you've ever witnessed?
When an oil company tells you that they're going to become carbon neutral by 2040.
Okay, I can only think of Maersk who has announced that it's carbon neutral by 2050, but I can't think of an oil company. Shell?
BP announced.
BP, that's true.
Last week.
That's true. Last week? Wow, okay. Well, that'll be hard. I have a friend there. I'll ask him how that goes. All right, next. Is there any future event worse for the environment that's worse than Trump's re-election if he gets re-elected?
Europe being unstable.
Okay. Because Europe is a driving force behind climate action?
The new plan, the new Green Deal for Europe is incredibly ambitious, and if actually these commitments are turned into reality, we're going to have an incredible opportunity to be at the forefront of driving the world climate change agenda.
All right, fingers crossed. Who is your biggest role model among entrepreneurs in general?
My mom.
Okay. Why is she in?
She's awesome. She's really incredible woman.
Cool.
And
okay.
yeah.
All right, fair enough. And when it comes to climate, who's your biggest role model there?
I'm going to shock you. It's actually lemurs. I
Who's
love
that?
lemurs. Yeah, the animals.
Oh, the animals.
Yeah, because they.
Okay. Auch lemurs, right?
Yeah. So
Okay.
it's. This is going to go on for long,
Sure.
so maybe
okay.
we keep it.
Yeah,
for,
and speaking of animals, it's funny because my next question is, what's your favorite animal? Is it lemurs?
Lemurs.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, answer that question already.
Madagascar.
Okay, and your favorite surf spot while we're at it?
Surf spot.
Yeah.
I'm not good at it, you know.
Okay.
This trip was the one and only time that
Really?
I went surfing. Kind of killed it for me.
Okay.
Skiing is my thing.
All right, and finally, will there be any humans left on planet Earth in the year 2300?
Yes, because I believe in us.
All right, okay. And in your kids, if they ever take over your role or your whatever you started. Okay, right. So we got about 10 minutes left, I believe, and I do have some more questions. Sticking with challenges, you talked about a lack of funding for green and clean tech yesterday. I think if I remember correctly on your slide, it said that there's a 75 trillion euro funding gap for climate change solutions. And so I did some research on this too, and I found out that according to PitchBook data, that the funding for clean tech startups actually fell during the past decade. And although $6.6 billion was invested last year in clean tech, get this, fintech received 112 billion, so nearly 20 times as much. So yeah, that doesn't look right, because I mean you definitely need a lot of investment to create and build the products and the technology to really move the needle. So yeah, what needs to happen? What are your worries, concerns, and where do you see a silver lining maybe?
My concern lies in the fact that we're still talking about impact startups in a manner that they're a different animal than a normal startup, and this is a really big challenge because it doesn't allow for investors to feel comfortable with putting money behind projects that have not only a business value but also capacity to have impact on society. And this has kind of been an ongoing thing for years now. It's really sad to hear. I didn't know the statistic about fintech getting so much more than clean tech. To make it clear, actually, the 75 trillion that are in my presentation from yesterday, they speak about investment necessary by 2050 in solutions that are not only tech, but also kind of projects which are capable of reducing emissions and so on, which are more development projects.
And maybe you could talk a little bit more about the reluctance from the investor side, why they still pour billions in fintech and software startups, but maybe why they're reluctant to. Is there still this gap? Is it just a matter of enough investors getting on board and then creating a pull effect, like a critical mass, or is it just them focusing on getting a quicker return? What's holding them back?
I think we have developed for decades benchmarks for products like software as a service and anything that is quite well defined in terms of being compared to something else that is on the market. When you look at the startups that, for example, yesterday pitched at the Green Tech here on this stage actually, they're so novel. The things that they're offering, like e-waste solution and like a parking spot for scooters, this is something that doesn't exist. What do you compare it to? And investors like to kind of, have an understanding of the numbers, and they're sometimes difficult to derive to because of the fact that we haven't had this focus before.
Okay, so the lack of numbers, you said, okay.
Benchmarks,
etc. Okay, and you're suggesting that when they have your number, when you produce more results, then more investors will jump on board and you'll see greater investment?
There's already a lot more.
Yeah.
We started our fundraising 2 months ago, and it's been amazing to see that in comparison to last year, there was a lot more traditional VCs that were willing to kind of speak to me.
Okay.
And the case before was that only impact VCs would speak to us. So I think this shows that they're understanding what's going on.
Okay, so you're starting to see a shift there. Okay.
Certainly.
All right, okay. Right, and sticking with this topic, because it kind of ties in nicely also with something else that's required to reverse climate change. So Plan A sells software that helps companies calculate, monitor, and reduce their carbon footprint, right? Just to reiterate that for a second. Now, what I've read, an argument I've read, and just to play devil's advocate more time, because I can't help being a journalist, looking at it, it looks like that's the low-hanging fruit. So that's good, and obviously that needs to be done. But then if we really want to reach the ambitious climate goals, Paris, we just said 2050, keeping global warming under 2 degrees, then we would really need a sea change, moving the needle, as I said before, like really breakthrough technology. So another statistic here from me, according to a BCG estimate, companies must invest 230 billion to cut emissions by 95% by 2050. And get this, the last 15%, so getting to 95% from 80, actually is the hardest, by far the hardest and costliest. So I'm not sure whether you agree, whether what you're doing is picking the low-hanging fruit, but do you agree generally that we need a whole lot more than just reducing the carbon footprint emissions by some? We really need, breakthrough technologies, etc. And do you see that happening already, or are we really, really far away from that?
Absolutely, I fully agree. And I would say that what we are building is kind of the starting point for a company to get into the discussion. If you really want to be sustainable and align yourself to sustainable kind of frameworks, you need to understand yourself as a company in all aspects of your existence as a responsible one. You can call it low-hanging fruit. I would call it like the beginning of a journey. And in any case, our plans are incredibly ambitious. We already have the algorithm, and this is going to be implemented into our product by the end of the year. So essentially, a company is going to be able to not only calculate its emissions, but also prepare for the risks ahead for the next 20 to 30 years. We work with a lot of companies that focus also on fully reshaping products of companies and making them sustainable. We work with other partners that help companies essentially improve their supply chain or change aspects about it to make it more sustainable. And I think in collaboration altogether, we would be able to address all these issues. Plan A focuses on certain aspects of this agenda, and we don't aim to kind of be the only ones doing it. We do this in collaboration with others. Right.
Something you also talked about yesterday, the need for collaboration, because after all, this is a existential threat, international one, global one, that also requires a cooperation on a global scale, right? So that actually brings me to my last question. You might have already partly at least answered it. What's next? What's the roadmap for you? You've only just begun 2.5 years in. Where do you see yourself in 10 years maybe, and do you have any news, any announcements to share about upcoming rollouts or customers, etc.?
So the vision for Plan A is that we become the go-to place for sustainability for companies. And what this means is quite of an elaborative journey ahead, because we have so many things to be able to so many things that we need to add in terms of features of the product so that we actually fulfill this wish. The ambition by the end of the year is that we're going to have 5,000 companies on the platform. We're at 300 now, so quite a lot to go. And in terms of announcements, we are launching the new version of the product by the end of March. So stay tuned.
All right, and that will be a more sophisticated model of your carbon footprint calculator and the action plans, or will it be something completely new? Or
so we won in December a competition organized by BCG Digital Ventures, and since January we're working with 12 of their employees that are helping us full-time for 2 months to essentially understand how we can build an incredibly scalable product. And although we are incredibly happy with what we built by ourselves, having the possibility to work with these incredible people that BCG DVR is kind of an opportunity for us to build an even more ambitious and quicker to accomplish vision. And the new version is essentially going to be the result of our mutual work.
all right, if any BCG people in the house, you should feel flattered. No? All right, okay. Are we out of time, or do we have time for one more question? Out of time. All right. Well, thank you, Lubomila, for being so transparent. Good luck on your journey. Thanks to the audience. Thanks for your attention. And yeah, big round of applause to my guest.
Yeah.
Thank you.
A round of applause.